Hello Caribbean, hello Smithers and the Grenadines, hello Diaspora. Welcome back to Page Turners Plus, your first stop for all things Caribbean literature. Today, we'll be talking about When We Were Birds by Ayanna Lloyd Banwo, and I'm your host, Kesua. This is my panel. We have today Eric, Paula, Roger, Tony, and Francine. And to kick us off with a little bit more information about the book, Roger.
Hello, everyone. To tell you a bit about Ayanna Lloyd Banwo and her book, Ayanna Lloyd Banwo is a writer from Trinidad and Tobago. She's a graduate of the University of the West Indies and holds an MA in creative writing from the University of East Anglia, where she's now a creative and critical writing PhD candidate. Her work has been published in Moco Magazine, Small Axe, Pre, Callaloo, and Anomaly, among others, and she was shortlisted for the Small Axe Literary Competition. Ayanna lives with her husband in London, and When We Were Birds is her first novel, and she's now working on her second. Now, When We Were Birds focuses on Darwin, who is a down on his luck gravedigger, newly arrived in the city of Port Angeles. The book focuses mainly on Darwin and Yejide, who have something special for each other. Their destinies are intertwined. They will find each other in the sprawling cemetery where Darwin works, where secrets lie buried and trouble awaits. We will discuss this book further. Kesua?
Thank you for that, Roger. So I guess we kick off with the conversation. I really enjoyed the book, but we have a lot to say. It's kind of unusual. I think one of the first questions I'll ask is, why do we think the author used death and the dead as a thread that runs through the books?
Well, I cheated a little bit in that I read an interview with her, and well, first of all, she literally believes in ghosts, which is interesting. And she also said that she wanted to explore our relationship with death. All the nervousness, all the attitudes we have towards death. And I think this was a wonderful way to do it.
And if I may add, Paula, the relationship that she explored with death, I think also had to do with connecting with the ancestors. Because I sense throughout the book that she is very strong on family. She's very strong on the people who make someone's journey possible, and that's your family, and she doesn't drop the ball throughout the entire book on that, even back to the dead, so the dead were with us all along. At least I felt that way during the novel.
And then if you take a look at like the acknowledgments in the book as well, it says, "To my parents, Gail and Ronnie, dead but not asleep." I think that in itself sort of gives her motivation for the book, in my opinion.
Yeah. I also think that, in fact, it's kind of reflects the Caribbean tradition. I think maybe not so much now, but I think we all know of older people who basically spoke to the dead. It's like something that's actually fairly common, I think, in the Caribbean, and so she probably just built on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that she doesn't reach far to pull from a general Caribbean cosmology, which is an African cosmology, regarding the belief in ancestors and that the ancestors are near, and there are certain people like Yejide and her mother who have this special access to the ancestral world. It's the circular view of life, not linear like Europeans hold to. There's a beginning and an end. No, it's circular. And so for I think any Caribbean reader, any African reader, any African American reader, the themes, the big theme of death and the dead shouldn't be any type of hurdle. I mean, I think it's familiar to us and how we relate to our ancestors. I mean, from the earliest time when I was a little kid, watching the movie Coolie High. Some of y'all may have watched Coolie High, and Cochise and Preach when they're drinking their wine under an overpass in Chicago. The first thing that Cochise does, he breaks open that seal and pours out that wine. This is for the homies who not here. That's he's giving libations. He's remembering the ancestors, and shoot, we do that all the time. That's part of who we are.
Yeah, that's something I grew up with. My uncles, every time they were going to drink alcohol, they would pour some on the ground for the ancestors. And I think in my family there was quite a lot of almost idealization of death. I know that my grandmother almost she had all these elaborate plans for her funeral, and she spoke about it all the time. And because we were growing up in a different era where we were, I suppose, more colonized by the United States, and we're getting all these new ideas from television. We thought it was something creepy, but to her it was something completely natural. Yeah,
it's true that a lot of times people, you grow up and you hear your older aunts, or they're always talking about, okay, so when I'm gone, this will be for you. It was just natural, right? And you would be like, what? Don't talk about but
they felt comfortable among the dead. That's what I sense with my older generations. They were not spooked by dead relatives,
Right.
But guess what? If just not to belabor the point, but it's still with the theme of death, and throughout the well, not necessarily throughout the book, but the bird that features most in this book, When We Were Birds, is the kobo. The kobo is a vulture, and it is hard to miss the kobos in Trinidad, especially along the Beetham Highway, where the dump is. Okay, and this idea of this vulture feasting on the flesh of the dead, I think there was a bit of an obsession there in that book with it. I don't know if you all got that, and Paul, I see you going to jump in, and also Darwin himself, who by his religious conviction was not someone who wanted to deal with the dead. I mean, the book is an irony, but that conviction of his, he did not want to be a kobo, in other words.
Well, the whole kobo theme, I thought, was interesting because it is a very Trinidadian thing. You do know that you're entering the city when you see kobo. And she mentions that in the text, that is a sign that you're entering the city. But I didn't think there was an obsession with the kobo.
I didn't.
It was this, as Eric pointed out, it was just part of this circle of life. And I think her point was that the kobo is essential to the circle of life, and we don't appreciate the role that the kobo plays in life. So I don't think it was anything. What I found interesting was her playing with Darwin's the Nazarite vow. You have nothing to do with the death, with the dead. I thought it was very interesting commentary on that, and I thought it was quite brave of her to take that on,
especially with a name like Darwin, right?
Yeah, I only just made that connection when you said it. It did not occur to me until you just said it. But yes.
What a chance.
Yeah, first name was Emmanuel.
God with us, right?
God with us.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I mean, I like the thing with the. Oh, excuse me. I like the thing about the birds. I like the thing about the birds. Not just the kobo, but other birds as well. Because, I mean, I grew up with the understanding, I guess the folk understanding, street understanding. If birds are circling over somebody's house, or birds are resting on somebody's house, that meant death is visiting that house. That's what we believe. I don't know if anybody else throughout the Caribbean believe that, but oh my goodness, birds are resting on somebody's house, and if they're not common pigeons, oh my goodness, you better go see about that person.
That's interesting. I never heard of that before. What I found interesting were the moths, because in Jamaican folklore, moths are, well, the big ones that she met. In the novel, she talks about small moths, but also the very big ones that are, as she describes them, as big as bats. And in Jamaican culture, they are the spirit of your ancestors. So when they come into your house, um, it's an ancestor visiting. So you treat them with reverence and respect. And my same grandmother I was telling you about, she would tell the moths all, all the family stories that they may have met since they died, because she always knew who the moth was. And she would address the moth by name and tell us, it's your uncle. He's just coming to visit you. And, so, yeah.
I really like the way she uses death as a theme, but she really encourages us in the novel to think about death as a precursor to renewal, where often when death is treated, it's a beginning of loss, it's grief. And that's not really how she uses it. And I find that really interesting. And it speaks a little bit to what you were saying, Roger, about that, her kind of having an interest in the way we think about death. I want to move us on to another question, which I wonder if Francine will take as the one that's from nearest to Trinidad, which is the space that Trinidad occupies in the novel. So then she's quite clear, the author, that this is not set in Trinidad, but a place like Trinidad. But the language evokes absolutely 100% Trinidad for me.
Yes.
And the text, the way it's written. Francine?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I lived in Trinidad for 4 years, and I was back in Trinidad reading this book. Definitely. The description of getting to Port Angeles, the way she described the city gate, the main shopping street. I'm pretty sure I recognized exactly where the cemetery she was talking about, the language. I mean, the description of driving up into the mountains surrounding the city. For me, I was back in Trinidad. I was completely immersed in the story, and I definitely felt like I was back there. So maybe it's not. I guess it's Trinidad in a parallel universe, perhaps.
To me, look, Francine, I don't think she's trying to hide where that cemetery was, because in one part of the book, she actually spoke about the power company's towers, chimneys, and that cemetery.
Right.
It's La Perouse, right? Because I was like, she's talking about La Perouse, right?
And
the one right next to...
The time that when they drove up and they were looking over the city, and they were talking about the greens. You're like, oh, look, there's the greens, and people selling and running. And I'm like, okay, it's the savannah, So, yeah. But I really, really did. I love that I could relate so much to it, having lived there myself.
Isn't this the only novel we've read that was written entirely in a Caribbean language? I think the others they went between English and whatever Caribbean language it was written in, but this one was entirely everything, narrative, dialogue, everything was in Trinidadian, which I loved.
So did I. I absolutely adored it. And it reminded me, especially probably because of the type of story she was telling, it reminded me of all those nights where you would sit around with your cousins and your friends telling jumbie stories, because they were always about the graveyard and, always about the Laja Bless and all of these supernatural things. And the fact that she wrote it exactly how we would be telling each other these stories, for me, it was just perfect. Like I was completely immersed in it, in the storytelling.
Yeah, I love that myself. The language, and it's interesting how when you hear it one way. When you read it, you read it differently, and you're able to see the words. And I see all the connections of how my grandparents grew up talking in South Louisiana, how we grew up talking in the street. Like, I ain't studying about you. The youngest generation don't talk like that anymore. Or people not from my region of of the United States, in terms of black folk, they don't say I ain't studying about you, and we drop the T's from the ain't. Ain't is already considered to be quote unquote non-standard English, and then we dropped it. I ain't studying about you, man. Something like that. So I love that about the text. And again, what it did for me is that it recentered the our language, and I'm using it collectively. Our language, our English, that we get punished for using our language, and it caused me to dive deeper into not only the politics of using, let's say, in the case here of the United States, African American vernacular English, but just how it is its own language where we have to translate all the time. We're translating and code switching, and it's such an adept skill. So I loved it that if anybody who's unfamiliar with this type of language has to read this book, then they have to do their own translation. They got to do the work this time.
But interestingly that you said that, Eric, because I think this book shatters that whole misconception that even if you do infuse some of the, the Caribbean Creole, so in this case Trinidadian Creole, you have to put some standard English alongside it. So I think that shatters that misconception. But this book is also doing really well internationally. So I mean, for me, it read smooth as butter. As it was like butter. I went through the pages easily, but I'm starting to wonder how it is received by the international audience who might not, resonate with the Trinidadian Creole. That would be very interesting when we do have an interview with the author.
One review that I read, the person said they had to, that it was different, obviously, because it was written in Trinidadian Creole. So the first bit was a little bit difficult, but once they got used to the rhythm, it was fine. So, and I mean, people, we always wonder this, but I've read so many books from different countries where, I mean, books, from South Africa and different African countries, and even, Ireland and Scotland, and they throw in their language, and, I just go with it. And in this day and age now, it's kind of easy to Google stuff. You don't find everything, but like if other countries can do it, hey, why not? Why not us? Like as Eric said, let them work for it to figure it out.
And the language is so beautiful as well. The descriptions are so vivid that I can't imagine anybody really struggling to follow the story. It is English in the sense that a standard English speaker or British speaker can easily understand it. Like you say, if you put your mind to it and you try and understand, it's not complex. It's not so different that it's a variation on English, as far as I'm concerned, in the same way that if a British person reads an American novel, it's a variation on English. It's no different. I wondered if it's about the people. That's what makes it easy to relate to whatever happens. And I wondered, really easy question before we hear a section of the reading. Does anybody have a favorite character they want to talk about?
I liked Darwin, and I liked watching him struggle with having to sacrifice his Nazarite vow just to survive in a hostile world. I have Rastafarian uncles, one in particular, who had a similar struggle, has a similar struggle. He was a very important influence in my life growing up. So I think half of the reason I'm in love with Darwin is I'm in love with my Uncle Junior. Big up, Uncle Junior.
Yeah, I really love Darwin. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Eric.
I love the Darwin. I love Darwin character. I mean, he was earthy, and at the same time, he was so introspective, and he loved people. He loved his mother, his queen, and he loved other people as well. But I would say that the character that intrigued me the most was Miss Shirley. Shirley intrigued me the most. Shirley, I think there was so much depth to Shirley that it comes out in drips and drabs. She's the eyeball of that entire operation. She knew everything that was going on there, and she tried to warn Darwin about the fellas, but it seemed like nothing that happened surprised her. So I think and she said it herself. She said, "I run things around here." So you got to think that was she entirely clean? That's the thing.
Sometimes I thought Shirley might have been an apparition. I mean, the book is about, yeah. I mean, she was an intriguing character, and I know we were, I guess, going to get around to the whole interesting relationship that she had with Darwin. But Shirley would rank up there for me. But yesterday, I just was in love with her. I mean, I liked her strength. I liked her independence. But even existing within that strong family setup, she maintained her independence. There was so much about yesterday that I liked. It's difficult to come up with a favorite because I take Paula's thing as well. I mean, Darwin, just a lovable, dear soul, a genuine man. We've lost Kesawa, Paula, so you may have to take us through the reading.
We'll take a break at this point to hear the reading. It's going to be read by a Trinidadian Vincentian. Her name is Judy Nunez. Judy Nunez. Tony, I don't know.
I just call her Judy Vera.
Judy Vera, right?
Judy Nunez Vera.
Yes. So you'll hear the authentic sound.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Vera, and I am here to do a reading for you, an excerpt from Ayanna Lloyd Banwo debut novel, When We Were Birds. Greetings, Darwin nod to everyone. Nobody answer. Worse, they done have on work overalls and dusty boots. He's still in his one good pants and shirt. Mrs. Jameson didn't tell him if to come in the work clothes or if to change when he reached. He didn't like the idea of walking through the city in overalls for everybody to know where he working. I'm looking for Errol. For what? The man with the styrofoam cup looked at him. Darwin dig in his bag for the letter from Mrs. Jameson and hand it to him. Mrs. Jameson from the regional corporation sent me. I supposed to start working here. The man don't even look at the letter, and the boys on the steps face hard. So why you stand up outside and peeping? You waiting for an invitation? Darwin feels sweat running down his forehead, but no way he was going to reach in his pocket for his kerchief to wipe it. Well, I didn't know. Somebody tell you it's office work you come here to do or what? The man take a sip from his cup and looked Darwin up and down, taking in the khaki pants, shirt, old but clean shoes. I have overalls in my bag. I just didn't know if he was doing an interview. An interview? One of the boys on the steps laughed out loud. All you hear that? He looked at the man next to him. Jamesy, you do any interview when you come here? Jamesy answers a screw face that make Darwin feel like he is the one sitting on the steps and Jamesy looking down at him. Macintosh, the same man continues. You had resume and thing when you come? Macintosh just stoops and take another sip from the cup. Darwin try again. Listen, just show me where to find Mr. Errol and let me. It's shame the boy shamed Cardo. Jamesy laugh and want them woman in town to know he does dig grave for a living. I not shame. I just didn't know if it's pretty boy work you want. The old man who's standing next to Macintosh, silent and watching, peel himself away from the side of the building and start walking toward Darwin. You could go by Mrs. Jameson and tell her put you back on the list. The bowleg should have made him limp a little, but it don't affect him at all. Man walk like a gunslinger in an old Western movie. You could wait till they hiring in them government office with air condition, an office chair, and woman to make tea for you in the morning. He keep walking, stepping slow till he close enough for Darwin to see his eyes. One full black, the other milky and dim like a river stone. You could wait and stand up in the next line and the next one, whilst the last bit of money in your pocket run out and your belly start to eat itself from the inside. And you can't do nothing but watch a woman turn whore to buy flour. And them boy on the block keep gun in your mother house and she can't say nothing. How that sound? Darwin feel blood rush up in his head. He had come this far for no old man to disrespect him like he's a little boy. The rest of the men watching him, waiting to see his next move, and it take everything in him not to grab the old man by his throat or walk out Fidelis and never look back. But he think of his mother house at the end of Dahlia Street, the water that only comes 2 days a week, the medication for her hands that hurt when the rain set up, the arthritis so bad. He push it down, hide it away. I need to work. I could work hard. Just show me where to find the boss man. His voice didn't even tremble. He heard a car horn in the distance, bass from a car stereo for a second, then gone. The city just outside, but sound far away. McIntosh stopped drinking from his cup. Jamesy and the other fellas on the steps leaned forward. Then the old man started to laugh. He laughed so loud, Darwin sweat bounced off the walls of the building. Then McIntosh joined in. Then Jamesy. Then the other boys on the steps. And Darwin felt everyone could hear them laugh all down the street, past the long grey walls and into the city. The old man's mouth opened so wide, Darwin could see all his teeth, white and perfect, nothing like a half-blind old man at all. Relax now, boy, Darwin. The old man clapped Darwin on the shoulder, and he feel his knees nearly buckle. Be bit strong too. Everybody smiling and relaxed like they was all brethren now. Oh, you know my name. The old man grin again, but this time it make hairs stand up on the back of Darwin's neck. I am Errol Boy. You working for me.
Welcome back. That was a beautiful read, and thank you so much. And let's continue the conversation. We just discovered a little bit about Darwin's first day at work. What else do we know about the characters? And I'm thinking particularly the female characters. Is this novel a celebration of sisterhood?
Okay, no, I think it is, but more importantly, I think it's a celebration of the power of women. All the women of Yejide's family are matriarchs, and she is being groomed to be a matriarch. And they keep this community. They're the leaders of this community of women who mediate between the living and the dead and perform a very important role in the society. So I think it's more about women having power and women being, it's kind of like the mother, it's kind of almost a mother cult. So I think it's more about power, I think, than about sisterhood.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's how I view it.
What jumped out at me with the matriarchal strength in the book. What I found intriguing was the actual relationship that the women had among themselves, daughter-mother relationships, and not only in this book, some of the books that we've reviewed. I think that's a question that maybe we need to discuss at some point, because those relationships aren't all that good. The mother-daughter relationships, and as a guy, I just wonder what's the dynamic. What's it's not testosterone competing here. So what's the dynamic, for the ladies on the panel?
I don't know. I think half of it is power. It's women believing that their daughters should be like them and should live up to their ideals. And then, of course, when the daughters become women and start to assert themselves, and they don't want to be imprisoned by their mother's world and their mother's ideals, I think that is where the conflict comes in. And you are right, Tony. We see this dynamic in a lot of the novels that we've read. Certainly, we saw it in the last novel that we read, Sherry Jones's How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. We saw a little bit of it in This One Sky Day by Leonie Ross. So it is something
I think Monster in the Middle, if I remember, had a bit of that.
Had a bit of it. It's certainly a concern. Certainly, women writers in the Caribbean seem to be very concerned about the mother-daughter relationship and the pulls and the pulling and the tugging that happens. It happens in real life, and maybe that's why they're writing about it. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
I sorry. I was just gonna say I thought that Petronella gave me strong Wilma vibes for some reason. She wasn't as extreme as Wilma in Sherry Jones's How the One-Armed Sister, but the way she ignored Yeji, I just got strong Wilma vibes from her.
And the way she understands love, I think I can definitely see the Wilma connection. You think love must be something nice and soft. It's very Wilma. You're right.
But Yeji, they really did not like her, and that to me was early on I was speaking about Yejide's independence and her strong will and so on. Without spoiling it for anybody else, you remember how she expressed herself at the funeral? With the expletive and all. I just thought that.
I wonder if it's not a question that there is some sort of pathology happening with Caribbean relationships that these authors are bringing to light. And it's more, in some respects, and I'm happy to kind of fight this out with you guys, it's more to do with thinking about challenging the kind of potomiton myth. The potomiton is more used in the French Caribbean because you're all looking very blank. But it's this idea of the matriarch. But the potomiton is literally like what's the word I'm looking for? A pillar in the middle of the house that holds the roof up. It's the idea that the woman is the center of the family, the home physically, as well as kind of emotionally. And when they're talking about the kind of like difficulties with their mother-daughter relationships, they're really challenging this idea of the often of the sacrificial mother that is kind of been so popularized and mythologized often by male writers, right? It's often suited their kind of mythology of the family. And these women are saying these myths are damaging, actually. I wonder if that's what's actually going on, and that's why these writers are drawing attention to it, rather than necessarily because there's some kind of issue that needs to be brought to light.
I don't know that it is necessarily myth. We are matrifocal in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Women are very important to our family structure. If we lose mothers, we have no families in the Caribbean.
When I say myth, I'm thinking of the sacrificial mother, right? Not that mothers are not absolutely present and central, and like you say, matrifocal families are not even dominant. I'm just suggesting the idea that women are always maternal and sacrificial, and that kind of that mythology of the woman.
Okay, I definitely could see that because motherhood and the relationship between mothers and daughters and mothers and sons, because we have a strong mother-son relationship in the text.
Yeah, but the mother-son, not to stop you, Eric, the mother-son relationships on the other hand tend to be harmonious, tend to be, a son.
But there was this struggle, the same struggle between Darwin and his mother. Because it was still the power struggle.
Because look what happens when he wants to express himself. It's either you do it my way or you leave. those were the options he was presented with. And so I think for me,
Yeah,
that
but the
brings.
love was never misunderstood between Darwin and his mother. That I don't think was ever threatened.
But it was equally conditional.
Yeah, but
And then
usually did
I
not
don't think
like
we
her
should
mother.
stop when we're examining the relationships between the women. I don't think we should stop with just Yejide and Petronella. We have to go back to Granny Catherine, who was a loving, supportive mother. It's complex, you know. It's
Yeah.
complex. The parent child relationship is complex, and there's a power dynamic, which I think the author is talking about. I don't know if I am just. It could be that I am just putting
Projecting.
projecting right. Yeah, I could very well
Yeah,
be.
I understand completely because
Yeah,
I'm in the same thing, and I'm wondering if I think part of it has to do too with especially like the women of the generation who would be our mothers, Paula, who did a lot of like fighting for, feminism and women's rights, and then our generation and younger, their interpretation of what it means to be a woman and women's rights is not the same as the mother. And so, even though basically we're fighting for the same thing, we're not fighting, well, in general for the same thing, but not really approaching it in the same way. And I'm wondering if that might not be part of what causes this dynamic of tension in the mother daughter relationship.
I don't know. I feel like the fact that Darwin has a very similar struggle to Yejide in terms of independence from the mother, for me, that it means that the book overall, the story falls into for me into the genre of coming of age. It's a coming of age story where both of the main characters kind of, what's the word they use, the self-actualize. And part of that is distancing themselves from their parents or freeing themselves from the expectation or the burden of their parents and choosing their own path. And so I'm going to pose the question, like, did anybody else read it that way? Is this a really Caribbean coming of age novel?
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
so.
that makes sense. And I think as saying that, I'm thinking one of the things I think that Caribbean parents have a hard time with is letting go of their children, is letting their children be independent. I feel like it's only nowadays that we can really say that, that children are really allowed to actually self-actualize and be their own people. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good take on it.
I didn't read it that way. I didn't read it as a coming of age story. Um, there's we have some backstory, but when we get to really the heart of the text in my reading, we're basically in the present day, and there's the struggles and there's the contests going on. So not saying that it's not in that genre, but I didn't read it. I didn't read it that way. Definitely struggle. Oh my goodness, the struggle is real. The struggle is
yeah.
real in that text, dealing with the mamas. Lord have mercy. Yeah. Um, Self actualization. Yeah. Self actualization was tempered in my household by a belt, a switch, whatever. You know.
I
But
wouldn't say coming of age either, Kessel, because Granny Catherine had been dead for a very long time. And Petronella was still angry and struggling with the expectations um, that was part of her gift, which she considered a burden. And I think that happens in a lot of families. Um, certainly in the Caribbean, like Francine was saying, it's certainly an issue in the Caribbean, having to live with all these expectations and having to subdue your own desires to please everybody else. And I mean, I'm as guilty as a parent of it as everybody else. I'm not putting myself up as a saint, but I can see the damage it does.
I mean, Eric calls it a struggle, and it is. But I think the book, the author certainly is able to demonstrate that sort of pain that is involved with children trying to tear themselves away from the mother. I mean, that was really painful for Darwin right throughout from the time he got on that Bedford old truck. It never left him down to the very end, which we won't spoil it. But I think Darwin dealt with that pain a little differently than Yejide, who I thought um, I thought she kept her aggression towards Petronella right in her chest, never was redeemed. There was no redemptive moment there, unlike the Darwin thing with his mother. I can't remember his mother's name, but yeah. So there was a different sort of closure, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
In Yeshida's case, I don't think there was.
But there was a different kind of relationship because
Also.
prior to their big dispute, Janaya and Darwin were very close. She was a very supportive mother, whereas Petronella was never supportive,
They
and
burned the
that is
spliff together, ma'am.
precisely, they burned the spliff together, and they philosophize together. The spliff is just a sacrament. It's not a big deal. It's like wine when you have it in church.
But also, is there a different relationship? Because also, Janaya and Darwin almost only have each other, whereas Petronella and the girl's name just escaped me for a minute. Jadida, Jide. They live in a big house. It's an extended family, and so there's a need to have a harmonious relationship when there's just two of you in the house.
Yeah, I thought
It isn't quite there in the same way when you've got your sisters, you've got the grandmother, you've got the men in the house.
I thought there was an extended family there, though, like relations and everything else. That house is busy all the time, right?
There's a little community in its own.
And plus, you got the auntie who had recently died, and Petronella is dealing with that. I mean, here again, here's the thing that complicates the story so much, especially from the tension between Yejide and Petronella, is that Petronella is a twin. I mean, identical twin. I mean, I think that's the twist. Well, one of the main twists in the story for me is, what do you do when your mama is a twin? That's an interesting relationship to negotiate. How do you place yourself? And I think that's the issue with Yejide. She couldn't find herself because her mama was tethered to her sister. And then the sister come back, sitting there knitting, drinking tea. I mean, where's my space? She can say, and I think she's right to say that. Where's my space? Where's my place?
Yeah, I mean, that was so clever, though. The sister coming back, one of these dead people that sat in the novel as if they weren't dead, and haunting Yejide, because that was the obstacle between Yejide and Petronella. That sister who just won't give it a break came back, as you said, drinking tea.
But I mean, it's not that surprising given Petronella's powers. She communes with the dead, and this is her dearly beloved twin sister. So, it makes sense that they would still be hanging out, even though the sister had died.
But the heartbreak, though, the heartbreak when she sees a second cup and she thinks it's for her. Like,
yeah, that was something.
Girl, I'm gonna move us on because I think we have a few minutes left, and I've got to talk about one more thing. And if it's not coming of age story, is it a love story? I'm gonna go first. My feeling is that Yejide and Darwin are two people escaping. Fear drives their connection, and you can't build a foundation on fear. So no. But I'll open the panel up. Open it up to the panel. What do you guys think?
I think they have a lot in common. They both come from communities of outsiders. I am team Darwin and Yejide. They're going to make it.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I didn't see that it was fear that was driving them, especially considering the fact that they changed their mind about what they were going to do. I'm not going to say what happened because I don't want to give a spoiler, but they had decided on one course of action, which I think would have probably been because of fear. And then in the end, they didn't do that. So I don't know. I agree. I think it seemed like they had a strong bond from the outset. One of the things I found was interesting is the fact that she said more than once that Yejide saw him as a green man, and I'm wondering, like, what was the significance of that? I wasn't quite able to figure out what that meant.
Didn't that mean that she saw life in him, not death? Because
Not death, right?
death
Because she did
around
say
people.
that, right? She did say that he's the one person that, right? She didn't see. Okay, yeah. So that must be it.
And Tessa, you're forgetting that it's fate that brought them together. So what fate brings together, no man can put asunder.
Ooh, wow.
But
Please.
go ahead, Roger. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I think this is. I don't want to sound like Barry, but I think this is the best kind of love story that you could get. Two flawed people coming together, because you have to remember, like, Yejide is deeply flawed. Darwin is deeply flawed and troubled with all that's been going on in his life and his new employment, and somehow, fate brings them together and they're able to come to an understanding. Here's Darwin in his dirt, I don't want to give too much, but in his dirty overalls, and then Yejide coming from a relatively wealthy family. I see it as love. I saw it as a love story. Yeah.
And apart from the central characters, for which you were talking about, Kesawa, as is it a love story? There's a lot of love flowing through this book, though, in the relationships. A lot of tenderness, should I say? Shirley and Darwin.
Tension.
Well, I think she really took him almost like a son. She was very tender with him. Enid, don't forget Enid, and who Darwin went to live with. I can't remember. All those relationships.
Margot.
Right.
Yeah,
All
there
those
was quite a lot of I agree.
tender relationships. A lot of tender relationships. In that book, and I noticed you all didn't get on to discuss Seema and Usually, because I have my views on that. I think one was in love with the other, not sister.
They were lovers.
So maybe an
I agree.
unconventional love story. Could we
There
describe
was there was no doubt about it in my mind either. The whole thing where they were talking about the fact that usually they locked the door every night, and Seema came every night trying to get into the room every night, and and they never really discussed it, and then she was upset when she was like, you just bring this man home, so yeah.
But they
So
were
it was clear
before, when they were teenagers. When they
That's the point, Paula.
Yeah.
That's the point. That
Right.
is that
right.
piece tells me what they were.
That when they were yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that piece tells me what they were.
All right. Well,
So it's
I
a
think
big
we
love
can
story,
agree to
Kesawa.
disagree. An I'll take an unconventional love story about love in its many forms. I'm happy with that. We can conclude on that happy note. We need to wrap this up, so I will ask very quickly for everybody to give a rating out of 10 when we were birds. Quick fire round.
Wow.
Could you do it out of 5?
Okay, if you prefer 5, I'm not.
Actually, I prefer 10 because in that way I can say my rating is 9 out of 10. I absolutely adored the book. I was completely immersed in it. I stayed up way past midnight to finish it. That was not my plan. I was like, I'm just going to read for a couple, I'm just going to read a bit before bed and I'll finish it the next day. And I ended up just reading straight through to the end because, like I said, I was back in Trinidad. I was back in my childhood telling Jumbie stories, all the graveyard stuff. And, 9 out of 10 for me.
Okay, quick fire, no explanations, numbers only. Let's go. Roll J.
I give it 9 out of 10.
Tony.
9.5.
Paula.
8 out of 10.
Eric.
9.
Kesawa says 8.5. And with that, thank you very much for being a part or joining us as we discussed When We Were Birds by Ayanna Lloyd Banwo. This has been an edition of Page Turners Plus. Next time we'll be reading Elizabeth Acevedo's Clap When You Land. Follow us on YouTube or join us on the YouTube channel. See our other episodes on YouTube. Find us on Facebook. Let us know if there's any questions you want to ask the author, because we will be interviewing her. See you next time. Thank you very much.